changing for this horse the context, we'll say, of what the round pen meant, and having this new communication with the human where the horse could learn how to stop and look literally at the human when called. And I would say, are you calling the horse's brain? And people are like, what are you talking about? I find there is a lack of separation for a lot of folks in recognizing that we need to separate out the horse's thought from his movement. Many horses, we are constantly yielding, moving, chasing, driving, and we don't recognize that the movement is reflecting where the horse's thought is. So all those times that we get that excessive movement, maybe we had a older trauma horse at the end of the day, his way of dealing with things was running away backwards. We had another one who was running away sideways. There's all of this excessive of unwanted behavior that we see in a lot of these horses, and people are often taught like block the movement or add more pressure to drive the horse forward, like in the case of the horse flying backwards, as opposed to saying, where's the horse's mind? And if we change where the focus is, then the body changes the movement. So in this case of this horse who's fleeing and insecure and full of tension and so on, the first starting place is we need him to be able to acknowledge the human. Otherwise, if there's no ability to check in with the human, he's just sort of ping-ponging around the round pen in this big, flamboyant, dramatic manner, and all of the human's communication has no value, or it might even be adding more pressure, especially with this horse, because of the way in which he was trained, driven through constant pressure all the time, and basically fear-based tactics. This horse was mentally far away from his body. He was completely overwhelmed being somewhere new, despite having been hauled all over, despite being ridden all over. So those sort of responses in him tell me how little the human's previous interaction has had to the horse. Because if it had had value, then he would have been able to mentally check in with his owner who was standing there in the pen. He could have seen things and work through things and let go of things, as opposed to fixating and we're going to say anticipating or hyper reacting to things. So all of those behaviors tell me where the starting point needs to be. There's no just like, let's just see, and then we just like dive in with random communication. All of the communication that I teach people to start to have is first based on recognizing what the horse is offering and what the horse is doing. Because we have to meet the horse right here, right now, in this moment. We can't just have some preconceived agenda of what we want to work on and then be hopeful about maybe the horse will comply, which is often what happens. Is people get in their mind, or they're told you have to have a goal in order to assess if it's successful or not with the horse, rather than saying, okay, wait a minute, I need to meet the horse where he's currently at. So anyways, this horse that was very chaotic and fearful and reactive and obedient and compliant, and yet totally not okay with anything despite years of training. So it was interesting to watch this horse go from this initially fleeing and flighting and slamming around and dramatic to everyone's going, whoa, I wouldn't want to be in the pen with that horse, to where he learned to stop and literally look every time the human called for him to look. We didn't want him to come over yet. We just needed his brain to be engaged, and that he could start to consider, and that as the human moved around, that he could for longer periods of time be able to look and watch the person. There are many horses where they'll look at someone if they're standing off of one side, but if you go to move on the other side, that horse, it's like there's a wall there, and they won't look, and they'll protect themselves, and they'll run off and move away. So he was showing some of that. There's also like imaginary boundaries if you're walking along the side of the horse, where a lot of times there's like a spatial trigger where, as you're, let's say, calling that horse's thought for him to look, and then maybe asking for a step or two to face towards you, and wherever you're moving, if he's on that fearful edge, you can be creating pressure that, like when you're parallel to the rib cage or farther back to the hindquarters, that drives that horse away. So recognizing a lot of the, I'm going to say, habits and patterns in our own physical movement was a big theme, whether it was with this horse or many of the other horses, where people started realizing how much they had been taught, or on their own they had learned to, I'm going to say, accommodate the horse, meaning when the horse wasn't responding as they wanted, they would start to work around the horse, or they would start to do things with their body instead for the horse's sake, rather than recognizing, wow, there's a hole here, there's a breakdown in the communication, I need to stop and address why my horse isn't. A big one is when we're about to lead our horse, having people check in and say, is your horse's brain directable? And now just draw your hand forward to ask your horse to step, so he's feeling the pressure of the lead rope, and that he can just soften and step forward following the feel or the energy that you're using down that lead rope to have him step. So many horses will not move unless the person is walking. Well, this is massive information, because if all that the horse is doing is responding to your body language of increasing and decreasing your energy, which could be a certain tool in a certain scenario. What happens when you go to ride and you go to use physical energy? If the horse has already told you he was defensive on the ground towards the physical energy of your hand on the lead rope, it's not going to get any better towards your rein when you're in the saddle. So helping people learn to recognize that there are so many different ways that we can check in with the horse, and we can recognize the potential for the unwanted behavior before it ever happens. We can stop, we can address it, we can help the horse work through whatever's triggering him to be physically tight or avoidant or mentally checking out or whatever it is he's coming up with. Redirect that thought, get that body soft, and then ask for what we originally wanted, and the horse can willingly comply without us feeling like we have to coerce him or chase him or drive him or contain him or wait till it all falls apart and then try and critique it after the fact, which unfortunately is something I see a lot. So, one of the things that people start to notice in their patterns, a lot of things, whether it's on the ground or even in the saddle, a lot of people drive with their upper body. There's this constant, like every time they're going towards the horse, every time they're even just leading the horse and the horse offers something they didn't want, or they're in the saddle, the horse is slowing when they don't want. Everybody's wanting to take from their shoulders to their hips and do this thrusting forward. Like if I go at the horse, I can make him do this, or backing up the horse. A lot of people want to go at the horse to drive him backwards, or they go at the hindquarters because they want to disengage the hindquarters. And what a lot of folks are missing is how often they are reinforcing a horse to be defensive towards the human communication. If all that we're doing every time we're interacting with the horse is basically scaring into yielding out of our way, that's not engaging the mind, that's not building the trust, that's not teaching adaptability, and that's certainly not connecting his mind with his feet so that there is softer, balanced, quality movement. So recognizing these little places where maybe we are unintentionally sending communication that we really didn't mean to, but in thinking of how do I communicate, a lot of times there's just sort of this generalized version, step at the horse or do this, or swing the end of your lead rope in this way, or use the flag in this way, or this sort of just general. And so people just sort of scuffle through and they see someone else doing it and they try and imitate it, and they have no body awareness of how often they are communicating things with their horse that they don't mean to.